You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Hello, and welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Roy Whitehurst. He's got a great background, an interesting background. He's a former CIA analyst and instructor. He spent 30 plus years evaluating written information, photos, videos, and other media collected by the CIA. And then later on, he taught media literacy skills to new CIA analysts. He's the author of a brand new book, which is the occasion for why we ended up meeting. The book is called Teaching Media Literacy with Social Media News, Practical Techniques for Middle and High School Classrooms, available on Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. The book shows middle and high school educators in civics or English arts classes or social studies how to teach the skills that students, and in fact, all of us need. In the podcast, Roy and I talk briefly about some of the evaluation techniques he learned at the CIA and show how anyone, not just CIA analysts, can build those skills in evaluating the accuracy, credibility, logic, and argumentation of posts in social media. And Roy, as do I, believes that these skills are critical for us to engage in a civil discourse and build a stronger democracy. You should know that Roy maintains a website called MediaLiteracySleuth.com. I'll put that in the notes, where he periodically posts evaluations of social media news, trending pop culture, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about understanding the role of a CIA analyst's disinformation and misinformation in the digital age, applying the CIA skills to social media, teaching media literacy to young people, and cognitive biases and critical thinking, the impact of emotional responses on information processing, and perhaps some insight into navigating conspiracy theories and mistrust, and ultimately the importance of evidence in discourse, crucial to the evaluation process. Very interesting fellow, and with an amazing background, and I hope you enjoy it. That other fellow on the screen is Roy Whitehurst, and Roy Whitehurst is the author of a book that has recently come out, and I want to make sure I got the right exact title, and it is Teaching Media Literacy with Social Media News, Practical Techniques for Middle and High School Classrooms.
That's it.
And yes. So, and well, how does somebody like Roy Whitehurst come to know something about media literacy? In some ways, I suspect that's the thing that will titillate people. But Roy was an analyst with the CIA, an analyst and an analyst instructor with the CIA. That's the CIA for 35 plus years, I believe. Yes. And so. And just so everybody knows, in case they're waiting for the big disclosure, Roy's, there are certain areas that Roy is not going to be speaking about, and I'm not going to try and get him to speak about those. So, but I would like to ask Roy if CIA analyst, we can talk about why or how that prepares you to write this book. But just for those of us who don't know, CIA analyst does what? I mean, the title suggests you're analyzing something.
Yeah.
And and what is it that you're analyzing, and how do you get those things? So
Yeah.
what does an analyst analyze?
Well, happy to say, in vague terms.
Yeah,
So, analysts at the CIA are analyzing foreign media as opposed to domestic media. And by media, we mean collected foreign written reporting that is intercepted or collected somehow by the agency, or photos or audio. All foreign based, right? We don't analyze domestic media, but we do focus around the world on collecting all this media. We vacuum it up basically with the help of other intelligence agencies in the U.S. And so what we do is we most of us aren't born able to do this, so we train, myself included, intensive training, really about 4 months or so of training to learn how to do this in let me say as dispassionate way as possible, to make sure that is something that we do without our biases coming into play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's something that I think is something you have to teach. And so we analyze texts, we analyze imagery. In fact, I was an imagery analyst for a number of years, where we focused on satellite imagery.
Okay, so just and then the distinction between doing it domestically and doing it with foreign sources, is that as a matter of law, or is that that CIA does not bring that intelligence to bear on domestic sources of information, or what? Why was that distinction?
It's by law. We are not, without special authorization, we're not allowed to collect domestic, vacuum up information from U.S. citizens, so to speak.
But what about public information? I mean, is that none of that? So, New York Times puts it out there, and everybody gets to see it.
It's something that we incidentally we can use. Certainly we can use if there's media that's published in the United States and it informs our analysis.
Understood.
Of a foreign development, then we can certainly do that.
I get it. Okay.
And so that's incidental, and that's not our mission. So our mission is to focus on foreign collection, and we have help from foreign intelligence partners to help us do that.
I see.
And so we bring it in and we analyze it, and we produce reporting on that.
And is it the goal? Is it? Let me tell you. Is it the goal to discern bias and distortion, or is the goal simply to figure out what the hell's going on?
Well, both. We, obviously our foreign adversaries want to obfuscate what they're doing. Sure. And so our job is to uncover that, and to do so in a way that is as dispassionate and objective as possible. So we get as many sources as we can to do that. And that includes text, written reporting, imagery. You might think a picture is objective, but sure, it does take analysis, because pictures and photos can be manipulated as well.
Well, right. I mean, so there's the manipulation piece.
Yeah.
And then anytime you focus, if you point your camera in this direction, you see one thing, and if you point your camera in that direction, it looks like a crowd, but over there it was 14 people.
Right.
So there's all sorts of ways of doing that. But I guess I'm hoping I'm not going into a territory. Well, if I am, we'll just edit it out. But I'm hoping I'm not going into a territory that you don't want to go. But in your book, you made reference in passing, really, to, by the way, I should say, I did not read the entire book, but I read a bunch of it, and interested both as a person and as a teacher. but my past life. You made passing reference to disinformation campaigns and you specifically named them, which I was surprised, but with Russia, Iran, China. So there's sometimes bias is intended, right? Sometimes information is intended to point you in a direction when really that's not the direction at all, and or not the facts. And other times not. And I guess I would just, if you can answer this, is it, I suppose this is my bias. I have believed that there are disinformation campaigns being run by various adversaries, I'm assuming. And is that the accepted, is that a commonly accepted understanding amongst your peers in the CIA, et cetera? And whether you worked on that or not, and I don't want to press in that direction at all.
Well, disinformation is not a new phenomenon, although the term has become more popular because of the advent of social media and the fact that so many of us, or really anyone, can spread whatever information or opinion they want around to anyone, really, right? Anyone with access to a computer. So the term disinformation, as opposed to misinformation, it's something that is intentionally spread via the internet. Social media, of course, is a big one, to misinform or to somehow intentionally do so, as opposed to misinformation, which is something that is done unintentionally, and that happens all the time.
Mistake.
Yeah, the best media outlets, the good media outlets, the ones that are follow journalistic standards, will correct anything that's wrong. But so many of us are sharing things on social media, and we don't have time to necessarily analyze everything. So we're prone to sort of sharing things that are untrue or partially true, unintentionally misinformation or intentionally disinformation.
Sure. Right. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So, well, that turns the conversation exactly where we want to go, which is social networks, social media did not exist when you started. Well, it certainly didn't exist in the form it does now when you started being an analyst at the CIA. So you were obviously working on all sorts of other things, and they were fun. But the skills that you learned and that you developed at your work at the CIA, does that prepare you? Does that prepare one, not just you? I'm assuming you are an expert, but does that prepare a person to? Is it the same set of skills that you can apply to social media, whatever social? And is there a reason to define social media as opposed to other sorts of media? You were it's so rudely interrupted by modern technology. Social media sources are the skills. I guess I was asking: are the skills that you applied routinely in your work at the CIA are they the same skills that you recommend? You're wanting to teach young people to bring to bear on social media, or has social media changed the game in significant ways? And why does it need? Why do you need a book?
Yeah, well, no, the skills are absolutely the same, believe it or not, that I learned at the agency. It's just applying the skills to unclassified information that any of us that any of us have access to, and those skills, are accessing media, analyzing it, evaluating it, creating it even. There's a whole part of media literacy that is about creating responsible media. Training young people, or really any of us, when we make media, we want to do it in a way that is fair and just, and we don't try to manipulate or use disinformation to do so. So the skills I learned were the first three. By the way, these skills are defined by the National Association of Media Literacy way back in 1992, but they are very applicable today. And those are access media, analyze it, evaluate it, act on it, or create it and act on it if needed. So civic action, right? So when I created it, I made imagery, or I wrote written reports and gave them to busy policymakers, and they would then act on that. And so I decided, you know what? I taught a lot of these sharp young analysts, sharp CIA analysts that we hired, and they come in and I'm ready to learn this. And we found out that they had trouble initially.
Why?
Being able to do this. Well, it's a skill that universities don't teach. Now, by that, I mean, for instance, they learn how to somewhat think critically, but not as much as you would think. And this is really about critical thinking, about media. They're all prone to their social media generation. They're all prone to snap judgments, quick judgments. And they weren't as good at it as we wanted. We wanted them to be able to know what their biases are.
Well, so wait, so explain this to me though. So there was a period of time when folks came in differently. Well, this is me. I'm projecting.
Yeah.
Speculating. Analysts, young analysts to be coming in, and they were already familiar with social media, which means they probably were younger. And did they think about media in a completely different way? Or did, when you went into the CIA, were you already thinking critically about the stuff that you were reading, and that stopped? No. I was no better at it than the folks coming in today. It's just that I like to think that I would be able to analyze text and media, but I didn't have access to a lot of the media that the younger people have today. Sure.
I did look at images, photos, and I did, of course, read reporting. And I took time to synthesize it and try to analyze it for a report for school, say, right?
Sure.
Now, we didn't use a lot of imagery in universities, right? This was more of that was even a newer thing. So I learned the trade of imagery analysis at the CIA, but I thought I knew pretty well how to analyze a text. Well, a lot of time, and of course, we write in a different way in the CIA. We write with the bottom line up front. Unlike typically in academic writing, right, we build to the conclusion.
Yeah.
At the end. So, and that's a skill that I didn't know.
Yes. Yeah.
Get to the main point. And that is a skill that a lot of social media posts you would think would do well, because they only have a few, social media posts are pretty short, relevant, or unless they link you to a longer. Sure. So you have to learn you have to be able to recognize, well, this is the synthesis. This is the key point of this. All this mountain of data coming at us, this avalanche of data coming at us these days. Well, what's the main point that the post is making? And is it a good point that is it making an argument? That skill I didn't know. And most students coming in don't know. Right. They're savvy at navigating social media, meaning they can find their way around. They can find anything they want. They're pretty good at accessing, but they're not good at analyzing and evaluating and doing it in a way that's to the point. So we taught them that, and I had to get good at that.
Yeah. In some ways, you had to become familiar with a very different sort of information presentation, right? I mean, yeah. Media is, maybe there is a reason to distinguish it, right? So social media has come to mean sharing information among in networks, and not necessarily I mean, we hear it all the time. Well, somebody's an independent journalist on social media, but journalistic standards, at least as they used to be, there are no, that I know of, right? I mean, there are no such social media standards, and so it's a whole lot more. A lot of stuff can come over the side of the boat in social media, right? I mean, that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot more, just a lot more inaccurate information and sloppy reporting. Right. And of course a lot, because anyone can do it now, which is great, right? Social media has democratized information access so that anyone who has a computer and an internet connection can say what they think or can claim to analyze it.
Here we are right now. Right.
and with a few clicks, it goes out to the world, right?
Right. Exactly.
That can be great. I mean, I was thinking, what are the positives of this? Well, you can pursue a hobby that you like. Like I love to play guitar, and I can find posts about how to play guitar, lessons on how to, and that's great. And you can learn a lot. I wouldn't have access to these instructors otherwise. It's great, but there's always the flip side, right? And the flip side here is there's a lot of crap out there that people claim to be experts at, and put it out there. So that's why it's a problem for us.
Indeed. Somebody would write a newspaper article years back, and you'd read it in the daily paper, or the New York Times or Time magazine or whatever it was, and I don't know that person. There was that sense of there was a perhaps unfounded sense of trust. I trusted that when I read that article about what happened, in New York City, that person who wrote that article knew what they were talking about, even though, they put it together. Chances are they weren't there when whatever event happened. Yeah. And so they went out and they cobbled together a bunch of different pieces of a story, and it formed a mosaic that they then tried to impart to me, I thought, accurately and fairly and all those things.
Yeah.
So I rested weight on particular sources of information. And now there's a lot of it because everybody can do it. And people are still trying to figure out, you're trying to give people skills so that they can responsibly figure out where to rest weight.
Yeah.
Because nobody is at any of these places, right?
Right.
So that's always been the case.
It always has.
And so now I have to make a decision. Everybody have to make a decision. Who do I believe about? And I don't want to get into the particulars, but do I believe what comes out of Anthony Fauci's mouth, or do I believe what comes out of Robert Kennedy's mouth about those things? And, I try to cobble together my, little remnants, like, well, geez, Fauci seems to have studied. I don't know. I wasn't there, but he seems to have studied at a particular university and is an expert in this particular field. And this guy less so, but so it's a real puzzle, but it seems like it's the same puzzle on steroids.
Yeah, it's the same puzzle on steroids. Exactly. I mean, we've always had, since since the printing press, even before that, we've had, yellow journalism and rumors and people spreading lies and falsehoods. That's not new. No. But the steroids part is that we just got so much more of it now. And the other problem is it's hard to differentiate what is an opinion versus what is a fact, or at least fact-based. Now, nothing wrong with opinions if they're informed opinions, right? But it's so easy now to go on X and, you're charged up, you're emotional about an issue.
Yeah.
You say, I'm gonna tweet about this right now, and I'm going to hit send or share.
Yes.
And then you go later, you go, I really didn't think that through very well. I was charged up, and the fact there's so much of that coming at us that we have a harder time. It's harder for the average person. It's harder for me. It's harder for anyone really to sort of say, well, first of all, I don't have time to analyze everything. So rather than share it, and I'm not sure about it, I'm just not going to share it. And I'm only going to focus on this one over here that I'm going to take a look. I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to decide if this is worth sharing with my network or the world.
Right.
I talk so much in the book because I think this is very important, that the very first step people should take, the very first thing people should take when they read something is, how is this affecting my emotions? Am I charged up about this to the point where I may not be thinking rationally about the topic? There's a lot of examples out there that there was one about Taylor Swift recently. Well, there's been a lot about Taylor Swift because she's popular
Almost every day.
I know earlier this year there was some fake images of well, there's a lot. But back in early January, there were some fake images of her claiming that she, some sexually explicit images.
Yeah.
There's more recent ones where she was endorsing one candidate or another, or appeared to be endorsing one candidate and another.
Yes.
And there was some audio that had been manipulated to sound like she was saying it. There was video, this kind of thing. And that's an example of a high-profile figure that how do we know that she did or did not say that? Because a lot of these manipulations are pretty darn convincing now. Your listeners have heard a lot about artificial intelligence.
Sure.
And the concept of deep fakes. Now, we didn't have too many of these when I was an analyst at the agency. Now we're grappling with that.
Yeah.
And it's coming from, there's a lot of Taylor Swift fans, go back to Taylor Swift, say, I like Taylor Swift, right? I think she's a great musician. She writes a lot of her own songs, most of her own songs. I think she's talented. Others may not think so, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, you usually have an opinion about Taylor Swift. So you're going to approach that media about her with perhaps a different lens. We might have different lenses or different opinions about her. And so we may or may not believe that image that turned out to be a deep fake. By deep fake, meaning manipulated with a computer algorithm and machine learning, which is a whole nother topic.
Sure.
Versus a crude.
There's so much to talk about there, but yeah.
Yeah. So the point is, it's harder. It's on steroids because there's more of it, and it's more convincing than ever if we don't take time to sit back and pause before we do anything else, before we even try to dig into it, before we try to analyze it, just how's it making me feel and what are my biases toward?
I think that piece that you are focused on here, by starting with how does it make me feel? If it makes you feel anything, then that's a clue about your bias. Right, or your mind, right? Your
mindset, yeah.
Right? Like, otherwise, it's just information about a singer, right? But if you can pause enough, if one could pause enough to sit back and, how does that make you feel? If it makes you feel positive or negative, there's information there about how you might approach the rest of whatever it is, this article or meme or whatever it is because it tells you you're already oriented in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think that is for my experience with young people, and forget young people, my experience with people is that is a often ignored aspect of their thinking.
Yeah.
They're not even aware that they have an orientation, right? I'm already...
Yeah, like a cognitive bias. Yeah, we call it a cognitive bias. I talk a lot about these, but mindset's one thing. It's a general outlook. Many of us are look at the world with a more narrow-minded viewpoint, which is not necessarily a negative, depending, or a more open-minded. But then behind that, that's operating in the background, and then you have biases on top of it. A very common one is confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias. Almost all of us have an opinion about an issue when we encounter it, the latest tweet about it, for instance, or the latest Instagram post.
Yeah.
So we're going to come in, and we're more apt to agree with that post if we already look favorably upon that issue. There's a chart that I have, and I dealt with this at the agency back when Iraq, or when the U.S. invaded Iraq back in the early 2000s. I was involved in trying to figure out if Saddam Hussein had mobile biological weapons facilities. Mm-hmm. Well, your listeners will know, and of course, it's very public that there weren't any. But the longstanding analytic line had been that he did have them in the past, and in fact, he did. But you see where that's going. So we had an analytic line, we call it at the time, that said, "Hey, he had them. He's got to have them now. Why would he give them up?" Right? And so
he used to have them, and then he got rid of them.
So we only had one source, pretty much, that fed us information that said, "Yeah, he's got them," and we believed it. Now, there were pockets of the community that didn't. And I'm making my own fallacy here, I guess you call it, of generalizing. But the analytic line was that he must still have them because he did. And the report we got from the source fed that because it agreed with what we already thought.
Right.
That was confirmation bias that for the most part, that got us to continue that line and make that assumption. And it turned out that we were wrong. And so you apply that to social media, that happens all the time. We back to Taylor Swift, whether you like her or not, there are people that don't.
They're probably the only people who are going from biological weapons to Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, it's a whiplash, right? That shows you the gamut of the issues. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's quite a transition. But the point is, we have confirmation bias about almost anything if we're not careful.
Right.
We have, unless it's a brand new issue, I can't think of much that is, I guess, but some niche area that emerges. But anyway, we have to be careful about confirmation bias. It's one of the most common biases that your listeners, or really any of us, are going to face, and I do too. I have to be careful, and that's where you have to pause, right, and say, "Hey."
Right. But you're saying, I'm pointing this out. Maybe I'm not, or maybe I'm not. I'm about to say what you're saying, but I'm not sure that is. But it's not. You have to pause, but it's not that one should. The opposite of right. Knowing that you have a confirmation bias, that you have confirmation bias about something. Doesn't mean that ultimately it's a good thing to reject that, right? The fact that you might be right. This information might be right, and that is I think one of the things that is so challenging. And I'm hoping this doesn't get us into one of the areas you don't want to speak about. But it's almost like social media has part of the effects of the steroids. of social media is that it's created, maybe it's the opposite of confirmation bias. It's generated a sort of a fascination with conspiracy. This is so implausible that it must be the case. And then, what's developed is a whole understand. The deep state is doing all sorts of things. And it's undermined, at least from where I'm sitting, it seems like it's undermined various communities' ability to even agree on what standard they will use to find truth.
Yeah.
But when you say apply critical thinking, absolutely, super important, and they are, and everybody is. But the underlying assumptions, and I don't want to get into that particular, but the underlying assumptions is that, in fact, there really is a deep state cabal that is hiding what was going on in the pizza parlor in New York City all those years ago, and what do you do? What does one do when there isn't agreement about where how do you even reach a conclusion about okay, that's it's I don't want to focus on a particular political issue, but when somebody can easily say that was all made up.
Yeah,
that wasn't me. Right? This is now they can even say that was a deep fake. We know so little and so much about them that maybe it was a deep fake.
Yeah. Well, certainly a problem for widespread problem these days. But I really go back to where's the evidence? People will say, well, the evidence is hidden. I don't need to produce it because I can't because it doesn't exist. But that is not satisfactory. It behooves everyone. You still have to go where the evidence goes. Now, you might not have all the evidence. There might not be any at the moment. But that doesn't mean that one should go and say that it's all been hidden. You have to have evidence. You have to have evidence. Now, people can disagree on the evidence or on the facts, right? And that's okay. But at least we can have a discussion about, but if there's no evidence that's produced and they're just saying, well, it's a conspiracy, I don't need, or it's the opposite of what the evidence shows just because it can't be true, so it's the opposite. That's a reflex. That's a mindset about the world, because you find that people who have those reactions tend to look at a lot of things that way.
Yes. Oh, yes. And absolutely.
They're not looking at one issue and trying to do the hard work to say, well,
right.
It's just, well, if it's government produced, it's the opposite of what they're saying.
Absolutely. They're saying this, which means it's not this.
That's not critical thinking. That's not critical thinking at all. You at least have to look for evidence, and one can certainly say, I can't form an opinion, or I can't have an informed opinion because I don't have enough evidence, rather than say it's the opposite of what.
Right.
It is the opposite of what the social media post apparently is saying, produced by the U.S. government, and therefore it's the opposite of that. That's not critical thinking.
Right. I mean, and you, well, if you had written a report based on that, well, you'd be out of a job, right? You'd lose your job.
Yeah.
That's not true. That's not true on social media, right? There are no rails to keep you on the road. One can say anything. Anything, no matter how implausible, no matter how much lack of evidence. And that's the it would seem to me that that's that somehow pointing at the evidence is a big clue about how to reach a more responsible. We'll never know. I mean, right? Sure. I'm sure there's stuff that is true. There's been things that have been true for which, evidence doesn't exist or didn't exist for a long time because who would want to provide evidence for that?
Right.
To keep it a secret. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in coming from my background, things couldn't be revealed in some cases, because of national security reasons,
right.
or revealed much later. But that's not to say that it's the opposite of or that you make up the story because you don't have the evidence. It isn't always satisfactory because there's no evidence, but most times there is. Most cases there is evidence out there if people are willing to find it and to set aside their bias rather than just say, oh, it's opposite of what if the U.S. government's saying, I'm picking on the U.S. government because it's.
Well, because they're big and you can easily. And they're
big, and the government's just a big entity, so it's got to be. We don't need to worry about which department it's the opposite of what they're saying. I'm sure you can find cases where that's true.
Sure,
but for the most part, I mean, there is evidence out there. There's very few things that are going to be. Where it's the opposite of what someone is saying, but you have to do the hard work.
So, that's that right there. You wrote a book for teachers aimed at middle and high school students, so young people, and so when the teacher runs into this issue with his or her students. They come from families. The families have biases that somehow trickle down. Sometimes, sometimes they're not trickling. They're it's specifically inculcated into the family ethos.
Yeah.
And so, what do you say to those? What do you say? What does the teacher say? In the face of that sort of, because that's really, I mean, that's for me, that's the hope for the future is that kids, if parents put in the work to do this, but the kids put in the work to sort of be able to make some sense, not give up their social media, God knows, right? But to make some sense out of that mess. And
well, I wrote the book it's geared to teachers in the title, but really these skills I teach, anyone can use them. The reason I focused it on
that really was clear in the book. I think that was really clear. This is for everybody. It says it's for classrooms, middle and high school, but everybody can learn from this.
Everybody, and apply it to any issue, any social media post that you find, you can apply the skills. Now, the reason, because I focused it on younger people because it's easier to catch them early when their minds are like sponges and maybe they're not as hardened and as cynical about the world. There's reporting out there, David, that says that young people are on social media almost constantly. There's surveys from Pew and other organizations saying that. Yeah. And there's TikTok. 90% of students are on are on YouTube, and about 60-something are on TikTok, and then the percentages are still there, but they go lower for other platforms. But the point is, they're on there and they're getting all this information.
Yes.
Let's teach them early on. And that's why I use social media. Let's teach them early on how to look at social media and how to figure out if it's true or authentic, whatever the case may be. But the point is, it can apply to any of your listeners out there who, I'm on social media a lot more, just because there's a lot of great information out there.
Yeah.
For my hobbies, to keep up with friends, we can all learn the skills.
Well, some of it is just fun. I mean, fun, right? I mean, you can look. Everybody watches the talking dog videos, and
Right.
we all know this is just funny.
Yeah.
The dog's not talking. This is just funny. And
Memes are a lot of fun.
Totally.
But that same reporting about the kids, the younger people, says that a lot of them are cynical.
Yes.
They avoid news. Now, I call it news on social media because for a lot of younger people, I'm talking about teens and even into their 30s, they define news as entertainment, pop culture.
Right.
It's not just the traditional economic reporting or political reporting. It's what's the influencer saying on YouTube. And so, there's a whole new array of things, but they're becoming cynical about some news because it's depressing, or they meaning the younger people. And I have to say, me too. I get depressed.
I know where you're going, and all of us, right? Yeah.
Watching or reading or consuming news, but it's important that we don't give it up, that we don't become cynical where we're paralyzed and we reject it.
Right.
We just have to learn how to engage with it.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, we're not civically engaged, and our democracy is going to suffer if we don't become informed and we don't engage civically or responsibly civically and in to help, because and you got to learn how to think. I teach in the book how to think, not what to think. How you should think about information coming at you on social media, not what to think about it.
No, right.
As long as it's informed with reputable evidence, with evidence.
Yeah.
So.
And I got to say, I think I'm looking at the clock and all, so I know we have time, or a time limit, but I think that's what I want for your next book. What I want your next book to
Let me write this down. Okay.
Exactly. Is sort of digging into the question, how do we, what needs to be the standards for truth, for veracity, right? Like, where does one look? Because I think a lot of people, and I'm not speaking here just about young people, but a lot of people, I live in a different part of the world at the moment, from a different part from what I used to live. So I'm living in Wyoming, and there are a lot of people who are very oriented towards the government in a particular sort of way that I would say mistrust.
Yeah.
But, the Reagan's famous lines about "I'm here from the federal government and I'm here to help," or "I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help," and that's the scariest line in the world, right? And that's their orientation, and I do think that there's been this sort of generation of a conspiratorial mindset. Like if somebody responsible, if somebody I'm supposed to trust tells me something, I'm not going to trust it. And sometimes for good reason and sometimes for not. And that's the puzzle, though. What happens when we're in a world where we don't have an agreement about how to agree, about what counts as a fact?
Yeah, right.
And we don't even have an agreement about the kinds of things we're going to use to discern facts, and that is the underbelly of all that.
Yeah, that is a big problem if we have alternative facts, has been term has floated around. But you cannot give up what I call the scientific method. You've got to gather evidence, and the government might come and say they're here to help, and maybe they're not. Maybe they harm rather than help. But that does not mean that you dismiss government in general. For instance, and I'm not trying to convince anyone, but the government provides services to people who need them. So the point is not to argue that necessarily, but to say that you need to go deeper. You can't just dismiss. It's almost a fallacy, a generalization about a category of things that the world is gray. It's not black and white. That's just the way, that's the way it is. And it doesn't relieve us from the pursuit of facts.
Right.
And to the point where we dismiss, oh, well, I don't find them, so I dismiss it completely as a conspiracy.
Yeah.
It does make for an easier time to make sense of events that you don't understand.
If I could just make something up, I'm good.
For a while, like a big natural disaster that affects everybody. Well, I don't know why it happened. God is punishing us, and maybe that's true. But there's a reason for that natural disaster. Maybe there's beyond that. There's people building too close to the ocean. You could dismiss and say, well, that's due to the government. I don't know, letting them build there, right? Or climate change is causing all of it. Versus, well, maybe that's not the direct cause, but it's really the storm. But the point is this: it's easy to dismiss. So yeah, we don't all agree on all the facts, except maybe that the sun is hot. But we need to. It's not an excuse. We need to think critically, and that's why I wrote the book.
Right. And to be clear, from my reading, and I read a chunk of it. I mean, I didn't get through all of it, but that's clear, and I think that's, I don't have a critique of your book, but I think and underlining that point, maybe that's the point. I had that one question I was going to ask at the end. What's that one thing you want people to take away from the book or this conversation? And for me, it would be thinking critically, working hard at responsibly discerning the truth, whatever that means.
Yeah,
is really important. And it's beyond really important. It's probably the thing that's going to get us out of if there is something that will get us out of this crazy polarized world we're in, it is a commitment to that.
Yeah.
It's really important. And that I got from reading your book. Super.
Yes. And I think it's the pursuit of truth. Yeah. Even if you don't feel like you have it.
Right.
It's the pursuit of it that I think we can all agree on, that I would hope so, that we all agree that we want the truth.
Yeah.
And if we're all pursuing it, and I think I give steps in the book about how to do it, at least in the context of social media.
Totally.
If we all agree to pursue it, we can then have a conversation about, well, what are my results? What am I finding when I do pursue it using the tips that I gave, or at least just curiosity, getting to your podcast name.
Yeah.
Let's be curious. Let's not dismiss categorically something. And I think that'll get us a long way.
Totally. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Well, Roy Whitehurst, I really appreciate you. I'm glad, we spoke, as I'm peeling back the layers here, right? We spoke months ago when the book was in embryonic form,
Right.
And I thought, well, I mean, we wanted to wait until the book got published. And I was like, well, I probably will never hear from this guy again. And I'm really pleased that you reached that point and that we got there.
Yeah. Well, I'm passionate about the topic, and I think it's very important that we
Totally
think about this. So
I completely agree. Yeah. And I really thank you for your willingness to give up your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.